You know when you meet someone that you immediately know you're going to be friends with for life? That's this guest, Ellie Cole. I met her in reception before the episode, and you just give someone a hug and they match you. And I'm a big hugger and she was a good hugger. And it was like our hearts went together, and we just I knew that I was going to really, really like her. Another guest where we didn't realise the mics were on, we were just chatting. So it goes a bit all over the place, but we do have some really pivotal, important moments. Ellie Cole lost her leg when she was 3. And in 2021, she became Australia's most decorated female Paralympic athlete with a record-breaking 17 Paralympic medals and an OAM, which is an Order of Australian Medal. But she was just recently on The Jungle, and that's when I noticed her because I'm not into sport. So, of course, I don't know athletes or Olympians, but I have friends that do, and they were very excited that she was in The Jungle and just as excited that I was going to have her on my podcast. And when I found out that she loved me, I was like, well, I'm in, and I got her, and I'm so glad I did. And you will be as well. Please enjoy one of the episodes that I've enjoyed more than – I mean, I love them all, but this is just – you'll love it. Here's Ellie Cole. Growing up, brothers, sisters, how many?
I grew up – there was 4 kids in my family. So I have an older brother, an older sister, and a twin sister as well. So I'm the youngest.
Identical?
No, we're not identical. But we're the opposite in every way that you can imagine. Yes. But we are best friends.
Yep.
Yeah. So it's kind of the opposites attract.
Yep. Yin and yang.
Yeah, it's a yin-yang relationship.
What does she do?
She's a fitter and turner, so she's an engineer. And she's on the Australian shooting team, actually. She just tried to qualify for Paris but just missed out. So the wonderful thing about shooting is that she can, keep going and going and going. It's not like a sport that requires a lot of, physical endurance in a way. So
unless her eyes go.
Yeah, unless her eyes go. Well, she's already got glasses.
Do you wear glasses?
I had my eyes lasered after Tokyo.
Did you?
So not anymore.
Oh, wow.
It was the strangest experience I've ever had because you're conscious for the entire operation.
Yes.
And they slice your eye open and pretty much pull the top off and reshape it and then put it back on again.
Done. And are they fine?
Yeah, they're great. Yeah. But I remember I had both of my eyes done and he did my right eye first and then he said, how do you feel after that one? And it is a pretty awful experience. It's not comfortable. And I remember I was just trying to make a joke of it and I said, I would rather have my other leg amputated than you do my left eye now. I started laughing, but he wasn't sure if he was allowed to laugh. And so I was like, righto. Just cut away. Just do the left one.
Just go.
Just go.
I'm just joking. And funny because people are funny with disabilities, aren't they? Like they really do not know. Well, you don't know who. I used to be a carer and I was a carer for a disability, man with a disability. And I used to make such fun of him because it made him laugh so hard. But people would get really offended. But, you can't say that. I treated him like my brother. Like we'd go to the pub all the time and, he'd take the piss out of me and I'd take the piss out of him. But people don't quite know whether they can. I guess it's the individual whether, I don't know, like is it that I can make the joke because I have the disability but you can't make the joke because you're punching down? Like do you think?
No, I don't think it's that at all. I think it's well, you sound like you had a great relationship with the man that you were caring for. And all of my friends that I have great relationships, all throughout high school, a lot of my friends, sometimes even took my prosthetic and hid it somewhere in the school.
Well, yeah, I would have done that.
It's happened quite a lot.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think there is a lot of political correct,
Yeah.
lingo around what you can and can't say around disability anymore.
Yeah.
And I find that makes things way more uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Because I can tell that, people are tiptoeing around my disability rather than addressing it head on.
Yes.
And it makes me feel uncomfortable when people are trying to be politically correct with it.
So because you would have been brought up obviously in a household that made you completely fine with your disability.
I'm so oblivious that I have one. And I always have been. Like, I remember walking around shopping centres when I was young and, people would stare at me and I wouldn't understand why. And then I would always remember, it's because I have a disability. And I still forget all of the time.
Yeah.
And
but as
all
a
of my
kid,
friends
you wouldn't
forget
call it a
as well.
disability. You just go, I don't have a leg.
Well, yeah, that's what it is.
It wasn't really labelled because we do that political correct labelling now, don't we? That I think when you were younger, you probably would have just said, I've just, only have one leg. And that's why people are staring at me.
Yeah, well, that's what I thought it was. But I have a twin sister, as I mentioned, and her and I would just go off we lived on like the edge of this reserve and we would just go off into like the jungle effectively and we'd do everything the same together.
Yeah.
And I just knew that I was the same as her, and
so
it was interesting.
You were 3 when you lost your leg?
Yeah, I was only 3 years old. I was diagnosed with cancer at 2 and then went through chemo for a year and then lost my leg at 3.
So what type of cancer was it?
It was called a neurosarcoma, which most people I think have heard of sarcomas.
Yeah.
They're quite common as the cancer strain, they're quite common in kids.
Yeah.
But neurosarcoma is very rare. It's a cancer of the nerve.
Yeah.
So
from the brain.
Obviously neuro, yeah. And I've never met anybody else that's had a neurosarcoma. It's quite rare. Even when I go to the doctors, and when you see a new doctor and they ask for your medical history, whenever I say, I had neurosarcoma, they're like, don't you mean osteosarcoma? And I was like, no, it was neuro. It wasn't in my bone. It was.
Why would you get that wrong?
I don't. Well, they've never even heard of it.
Oh, wow!
But why would you get that wrong? Exactly.
So condescending. I love doctors.
Yeah,
that are like that. So they had to amputate.
Yeah. So 1 year of chemo. Effectively, they were trying to find some kind of solution on trying to save my leg if they could. But it just wasn't working. I was getting really sick from the chemo. Chemo does awful things to your body. Awful. And I was becoming more sick from having the chemo than what the cancer was actually doing to my body. And so after a year of just trying to save the leg, the doctors made the decision with my parents that they needed to amputate. And obviously that's a huge decision for a parent to make for their young child.
And do you remember a conversation?
No, I was so young. But what I have been told is that my mum, when I was going to the surgery, she had to explain what was happening to me.
Yeah.
And how do you explain that to a 3-year-old? So she told me that I had to have a naughty saw taken away. But they fit me with a prosthetic when I was still in surgery. And so as far as I was concerned, when I came out of the operation and I looked under the sheets, and I still saw that there were 2 legs, even though one of them was like made of metal.
Yeah, yeah.
And so I thought that I was fine. They'd taken the naughty saw away, but I still had 2 legs. And then they realised that they'd put the wrong size foot on my prosthetic, and then they took it off with an Allen key. And that's when I realised that that's not, the way that legs are supposed to work. And my life was going to be very different from that moment on. And I was in a foul mood for a few days, of course. There's lots of videos, family videos of my physiotherapist and my family trying to get me up on my feet as soon as possible.
Yeah.
And I was not having a bar of it.
Little stubborn child.
Yeah, I still pull the same faces when I'm not happy at 32.
Oh, I love it. I used to pull faces like when I was a kid, and they used to call me Pooey.
Yeah.
A lot, so many, because I'm a really happy adult, but as a kid I was just a pooey kid, and they just do all these photos of me just with pooey face, and that's what they were like. We used to go, come on Pooey, smile. Never made me smile. So in retrospect, never tell your child that they're pooey to make them smile, because it'll make them worse.
It's so funny that kids always think that pulling faces like that is going to work and they're going to get their own way.
And I never did. I was a stubborn little thing as well. So did they kind of go, oh, well, you got a leg with an Allen key that can take your foot off. You're bionic woman. Did they kind of have that approach to it, or? No,
it wasn't like that back then. It was very much like I I was a sick child and now I'm with a prosthetic and that my life wasn't going to be the same anymore. And it's kind of awful, actually.
Yeah.
Like, it's very different now.
Yes.
But I was watching family footage a few years ago. This documentary came out called Rising Phoenix that I was in, and I had to find some family footage for that documentary. And so I was going through the archives and looking at this video of when I did stand for the first time. It was 2 days after I had my leg amputated.
Oh, God,
and
I love that you've got footage of that.
Yeah, I said to the nurse that I just wanted my leg back because I realised that I wasn't getting it back. And she just said, well, you're not getting it back. And that was her response to me.
Wow.
And I always thought that was really heartbreaking. Like, it was quite emotional to actually watch that footage for me.
Yeah.
But I was fortunate that, I had an amazing family who made it seem like, I was a bionic woman, and it was an amazing thing that I had a prosthetic.
And it makes all the difference in your home. What you're being told every day.
It really does. But the medical world back then was slightly different. Yeah. And, I think
they
it has improved. Yeah, they definitely did have to catch up. But now, I don't know if it's because of the platform that the Paralympics have or just more visibility of people in general, but it seems to me now that when people do acquire a disability, they certainly go through a transition phase, of course, but they know that there can be a life after, which back then there wasn't. Yeah, so exactly. It is different.
And so the house on the edge of the bush, where was that?
That was down on the Mornington Peninsula in Mount Eliza.
Wow,
yeah,
beautiful.
It's a little beautiful area that I grew up in.
So that's where you grew up. Oh, that's such a great upbringing.
It was.
And that's where you started swimming?
So I started swimming in Mornington at this, I think it's still around, King's Swimming, like Learn to Swim, King Swim.
Okay.
I started learning to swim there. I started actually learning 8 weeks after my leg amputation for rehab. But then I went through the Learn to Swim program with my twin sister after that.
And were you a better swimmer than her?
No, I wasn't. I was just, because we've got lots of family footage. I was just thinking of the family footage of when I was a young swimmer. I wasn't. I went around in circles for a while.
Like one oar boat.
Yeah. So she was a much better swimmer than I was. But, I'm definitely someone who likes to put everything that I have into something. And I think that's kind of what got me through to the elite level of sport. Yeah.
So you've never had a prosthetic in the pool?
No,
ever?
No.
You wouldn't.
Well, back then they weren't even waterproof. I only walked in the water for the first time 6 years ago in my mid to late 20s. I wasn't ever able to walk in the water.
So are you really agile on one leg?
Oh, super.
Why do you have a second then?
Like a prosthetic?
Yeah.
Well, imagine hopping around everywhere. No one's ever asked me that. That would be exhausting. I think the reason why
you just said you were super at it though. So
I'm pretty good. But I broke my foot a couple of years ago as well. I stepped in a pothole, instead of my ankle twisting, my foot snapped.
Shit.
And since then I haven't been as agile. You know when you think back to the good old days when nothing had been broken in your body? Yeah.
Yes. I've never broken a bone.
Oh, it's awful.
I don't ever want to touch wood. I would never want to break a bone. I remember in the jungle you were it was such a fascinating you pointing out your bum.
Oh,
my differences
glutes.
In your cheeks.
Yes. I haven't watched the series, so I don't know what's made
it
to air. So my ass made it to air.
Yeah, it did.
Yes.
It did. And everyone, you went, you can touch it.
No, because it looks different when you got to feel it. Because do you want to touch it?
Yeah, I do now.
So do you feel the difference?
Oh my God. Oh, what's that? Oh, it's a ticket. It's a receipt. There's such a difference.
Yeah. So that did make it to air. Okay.
Yeah, it did.
So
and it was
I
really interesting.
Two really different glute sizes.
You could see the difference.
And one thing I don't think most people realise, so the way that I've never, this is a great podcast because these are all things that I've never actually spoken about. So with the socket's made of fiberglass. And the way that they mould it when they make it is with the same stuff that they would, they make a cast out of plaster like they would if you break your arm and you have a plaster put on. Yep. So that's how they mould it. So they put it in hot water, they wrap it around, and then they make a mould, and then they somehow do a fiberglass out of that mould.
Yes, yeah, because there's a plaster of Paris is the stuff, and then they they put that, it's kind of like prosthetics for special effects and stuff like that. They make with a different type of material inside the plaster Paris. So.
Exactly. So that's how they make it. But when I get my prosthetics made with my socket, they kind of like, there's a bum bone that you sit on.
Yeah.
If you can feel your bum, you can feel the bone there.
Yeah.
So all of my body weight actually goes through like a little seat that they make within the socket. So all of my weight goes through my sitting bone when I'm standing. So it doesn't actually go through the end of my leg.
Right. Yes.
So I've never actually like weight bared on that bone before because I don't have like a fat pad there. Most people with their knees, they have like a shock pad. So if I put weight on the end of what's left of my leg, it would be excruciating. Like I wouldn't physically be able to do it. And so I actually walk around on my sitting bone.
Yes. You know what? That's how you do walk. I wanted to ask you, because you limp.
Yeah.
Like you have a gait. And I, while watching The Jungle, wanted to say to you, well, I think your leg's too long. I think they've made you that wrong.
So
like, because I know what I'm talking about.
But it's actually the right height, but I don't weight bear through the end of my bone.
So this is fascinating.
And so I have like next to no bone density in my right femur because I don't weight bear. And I don't really weight bear through my hip either. And a few years ago, I slipped in a driveway and I just landed on my prosthetic knee. And because I don't have any bone density, my hip like broke in two different places. So
do you have to take extra calcium tablets or something for that? Or?
No. I did a great campaign though for a vitamin company. I'm like making lemonade out of lemons here.
Now I want to talk about... I know we should talk about Paralympics. I don't know anything about it. It's so good that you're an Olympian.
It's actually really great to ask questions about the Paralympics then if you don't know anything about it because you can go straight from the beginning.
Yeah, all right.
You don't need to know a lot about sport to ask about sport.
No, that's true. Well, and that's the thing is you have to know as little about sport to ask about sport because you don't know anything.
I think I was an ambassador for the FIFA Women's World Cup.
Yeah.
I don't know anything about football and they were like... It's actually great that you are an ambassador that doesn't know anything about football because you're asking questions.
Yeah,
we're trying to bring a whole new audience into this sport and you're asking the questions that they're asking.
Well, you...
Same with the Paralympics.
Are very good because I became a Matildas fan because of the Matildas. Like now I'm into female women's soccer. Exactly. Like how amazing was it? Oh my God, it was the bells crying. And I think if any Olympics I would watch, it would probably be the Paralympics because these are people who have gone through adversity.
Yeah.
And I just think, that's better than the ones who are just, really, really amazing at what they do and they just, Thorpies of the world. But I saw like your bedroom was just covered in swimmers.
Yes, when I was younger.
Yeah.
Absolutely covered.
Mine was covered in Corey Haim.
Swimming.
Yours was Thorpe.
Well, I'm doing the Olympic and Paralympic trials commentary this year.
Great.
And I messaged one of the co-hosts yesterday. I saw she was going to be a co-host and I said, I'm so excited to do the swimming with you because you'll finally get to see just how obsessed with swimming I am. I still am.
Why?
I've always loved the swim team. I've always loved them. It obviously came from the Sydney 2000 era. It was a golden era of our swim team. I've always just loved the swim team. I've loved Susie O'Neill, Ian Thorpe, Petria Thomas. I just think they're all amazing athletes. Yeah. I love how technical swimming is, how, you can watch swimming and you can see if someone executes a turn, like stuff that's going to bore you, turn really well, underwater work really well. If they can hold on to the last 25 metres. I just love watching it. I always have.
All right. And that's why you became
a swimmer.
A swimmer.
Yes. That's 100. I
so
became
after
a
you
swimmer.
Started going in circles, you then started technique. Like you started going, now I'm going to go straight and I'm going to learn how to do it. And there's more to just learning that. There's so much technique.
Yeah, exactly. So I went through the Learn to Swim program and then I graduated from that when I was about 8 or 9 years old and started squad swimming. And that's when I fell in love with I was inspired by the Sydney 2000 Olympics, but then when I was in the pool myself, I was just inspired with trying to chase perfection in the technical sense of swimming, but never actually being able to 100% achieve it. And that's why I was on the swim team by the time I retired for almost 17 years, because in that 17 years I only swam what I felt were 2 perfect races.
Really?
And I wanted to swim that again, and I never achieved that, which really infuriates me because I want to get back in and try again. But
And you never have to this day?
last time I swam what I would consider to be a perfect race was in 2015, and I retired in 2022. So, yeah.
Why did you retire?
7 years of chasing it. I just got too old for the sport, I think. But, you know,
Is there a certain
I think
age
that's also a
for
bit of a
most
cop-out.
swimmers? Is it?
Well,
Why?
if you think like Emma McKeon, her and I have been on the swim team for effectively the same amount of time. You know, there's photos of her back when Telstra sponsored our Australian swim team. You know, she was on the Australian Dolphins back then, and she's still competing. And I remember speaking to her at the Commonwealth Games being like, I need to retire here because I'm getting too old. And then I realised I'm speaking to the wrong athlete because we're the same age and she's still swimming world-class performances. But I think, you know, without, you know, using age as an excuse, I actually think the reason why I progressively declined in my performance over my career is because I was getting injured, like my broken foot really threw a spanner in the works because my kick was my strength, and then I never got that back again. And then I had double shoulder reconstruction, and I never really got my shoulders back to where they were from swimming. And then in Tokyo, right before Tokyo, I broke my right hip, which I spoke to before. And I was never able to do backstroke in the same way because I couldn't get that cross connection again. And so I think it was just coming back from injury but never being quite the same again.
Yeah.
And that's all it was. And when you're a world-class athlete, you need to be at 100%. You can't really be at 97%, if that makes sense.
Because it'd be like, why bother?
Well, it's not why bother, because you find satisfaction from other areas of the sport. But if you want to win again, it's extremely difficult to do that after you have, you know, injury after injury after injury.
And there's such a career for you in like commentating or being a sports ambassador, does that fulfill you? Not clearly as much, but does it?
It does. It really does. I think it was interesting in my career because I always wanted to win a gold medal for Australia at the Paralympics, and I was able to do that. And then I went into my next big goal was to break a world record, and I did that a few times as well in my career. And
how many golds have you got?
I won 6 golds in my career by the end.
I nearly fell off my chair.
What was fascinating is that in Tokyo, I didn't win any gold medals at all, right? I won a relay silver and a relay bronze, but I got the most out of those games than I ever have because of my broken hip going to those games, and then COVID on top of that. And then we also received pay parity for the first time as Paralympians in medal bonuses.
Yeah, you talked about that in the jungle. That blew me. I mean, it didn't blow my mind. I wasn't surprised, but
it makes you angry, doesn't it?
Fuming.
So I achieved a lot in the sport in different areas, if that makes sense. Yep. I realised that winning in sport is actually not that it's cracked up to be.
Is that a personal thing or is that across the board? Like, do others, do you know if that's how others think?
I think it's personal to me in a way because I was always grown up with this mentality that in sport you have to win at all costs. And I put everything in my life on hold to be able to be a champion in the pool. And I was miserable when I was winning because I wasn't dedicating any time to other parts of my life at all. It was a win or you're nothing kind of mentality. And it wasn't until I really started dedicating parts of myself to other areas in my life where I became more of a whole athlete. Mm-hmm. And then I stopped winning, but I was actually happier where I was like, well, you know, winning's great, but at what cost? At what expense?
What do you mean a whole athlete?
I was, studying. Mm-hmm. I was spending more time with my family, more time with my partner. Mm-hmm. I wasn't, spending every minute that I had in my life dedicated to my sport. Like I used to go out to cafes or restaurants with friends after training and I would always make sure that I was like, I'd leave by like 7 p.m. because I had to be in bed by 8:30, things like that, you know. Yeah. I started enjoying my life more rather than just being an athlete. Yeah. Because when I was in the middle of my most success in sport, this is around about London 2012 era, everything that I did was to better myself as an athlete. Right. Everything. Yes. I'm saying everything.
Right. So from choosing who you were with to what you ate to...
It becomes obsessive. Yeah. It really becomes obsessive.
And that's not healthy, is it?
No, it's like, honestly, I think back in those days, I think I had some mental illness because I was so obsessed with winning that I just discarded everything that I was as a person.
Would you have taken illegal drugs to win?
Oh, absolutely not. Like,
You
what's
weren't
the
that
point?
obsessive.
No, what's the point?
But some do, don't they?
Yes,
To
but
win.
I think that
But what is the point? Why do they do it?
Those people, I think, are motivated by different things. Obviously, in Olympics and now in Paralympics as well, there's obviously can be quite a lot of money in terms of endorsements. Some countries offer exorbitant prize money for gold medals.
Right.
And for someone, I know China, for example, offer quite a lot of prize money. And for some families, if they win a gold medal, that sets their family up for the rest of their life. And if you can do it without being caught, then
It's a risk.
It's a risk that they're willing
you can
to
be
take,
willing to take.
which is really unfortunate.
And we wouldn't really have a lot of that. Well, we don't get, exorbitant
Athletes
money
don't get
for
paid
winning.
here.
Yeah.
we get paid peanuts.
Yeah.
And I think that's a misunderstanding.
Unless you're a straight white man.
A lot of
Unless you're into elite men's sports where they get paid ludicrous amounts. Women's sport has just been forgotten.
Yes.
Para sports would be even lower.
It would be. So, and particularly Olympic and Paralympic sports, because if you think about NRL and football, they're all professional codes. They get a lot of money through selling ad space and memberships, and we just don't have that in Olympic or Paralympic sports.
It's really weird to me, because I'm not into sport, that you guys would be way more inspiring for so many people than they would be.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know. I've never understood sport because, what you were just talking about then, about you become obsessive, you become the best to win at all costs. I've always thought of Olympians in a way of, and I guess just elite sports people as well. They're a different type of person. They have an ability to get up at 4 a.m. every single day that other normal people just don't have. They have a drive and for me, to watch like a footballer who is at the top of their game, that doesn't inspire me, because I'm like, I'm never going to be that.
Yeah.
Like, are we just watching a freak of nature here? Like, that's how I look at it. Like, you're just idolizing a freak of nature who just happens to have a different mind than the majority of people. I look at, I think, disabilities, and I think that there's a whole other level of breaking through something that, that's so inspiring to me. That, yes, you could have also that freak of nature, ability to be so gifted at what you do, but you might not necessarily, and you can still be included in this sport.
Yeah.
Like, that's the way, and why I've never really, I guess I'd rather see normal people doing extraordinary things than extraordinary people doing a really, to me, boring, throwing a piece of pigskin around. Like, why would I want, but so many people obsessed with watching, and they watch you like they own you, like they cry for you, they get angry with you, you're owned by them. They own you. Like, she's ours. And, or that team's my team. They're my team. And we lost.
I really relate to what you're saying there. I used to train with the Campbell sisters in the lead up to Tokyo. So Kate and Bronte Campbell, the swimmers.
Oh, yeah.
And
I do know them.
You do know them? Well done. So they're obviously amazing athletes in their own right. Like Kate is at the moment trying to qualify for her 5th Olympic Games, which is crazy to think that she's been at the top of her game for so long. But we're always, talking about the differences between the way that the public perceive Paralympic athletes and the way that the public perceive Olympic athletes, because, Olympians, they're expected to win from our public. And I actually feel in a way that they're not as relatable as they are to the Paralympic team, because, like you just mentioned, all of the people on the Olympic team seem to be people who are genetically gifted, or there's something, within their DNA that make them such exceptional athletes, because if they didn't have that, then they would just be a high-performing athlete like a lot of other people are, not quite making it to that Olympic level.
Yes.
Paralympic athletes, the majority of us aren't genetically gifted. We've been dealt a terrible hand, or something that's happened to us, or some kind of adversity. We've gotten through to that. Some people have 50, 60 operations to be able to step onto a diving block, and that's not relatable either.
No, but it's inspiring.
The idea of breaking through something that is really difficult, and to still want to get the best out of yourself. I think people find that really relatable.
Yes.
And it is inspiring to watch. But there is a lot of argument around whether the word inspirational is appropriate when it comes to Paralympic athletes.
Right.
Because a lot of Paralympic athletes say, I don't want to be, and it's quoted quite a lot, your inspiration porn.
Oh,
Whereas,
yeah, okay.
you know, we want to be seen as obviously high-performing athletes. So it's kind of
I
like we
think
want
you
our
are.
cake and eat it too.
Yeah, no.
But
yeah,
it's interesting because Paralympics Australia a few years ago pitched this idea that they wanted to start this trending hashtag called #NoInspo. Like, we don't want to be your inspiration. But I hated that
That's
because
a bit negative, isn't it?
when I was training as an athlete, as in the lead up to Tokyo and the lead up to the Commonwealth Games, and I was in a training session and I feel like I couldn't get any more out of myself. Like, I was in excruciating pain. Like, I just wanted it to stop. I would think of my Paralympic teammates. I would think of Maddie De Rosario, you know, one of our marathon wheelchair racers, her being able to hold 180 heart rate for 2 hours. And that would get me through my training session. So I was actually finding inspiration from my Paralympic teammates to be able to get the best out of myself. And so I love that people call us inspirational.
Good.
But it doesn't sit well with some Paralympic athletes for whatever reason. But I think that's because people see them as inspirational because of their disability only.
Yeah.
Whereas I don't think that's the case.
And I don't think many people do.
No, neither.
I think inspiration comes in so many different forms. To be inspired is to be inspired. And you've just been inspired by people that you've, you know, been in the same industry as. And that's the same as for anyone. You can be inspired by someone you work with. You know, to say, I don't want to be your inspo, I think is a really negative, like, you know, but I can get it. And I think that also lived experience is different. I don't have that. So I have to respect where people come from with that. But it is a shame because they're assuming what other people are thinking about them, and it probably isn't.
Which I think is quite...
or maybe they have been.
I don't want to say that, like, that's hypocritical, but it is hypocritical in a way because we're assuming what you're thinking.
Yeah.
But we don't want you to assume what we're capable of.
Yes. Yeah, it's almost a double standard.
Yeah, so no one should assume anything
Let's
about
not assume
anyone.
anything. You know what assuming does? It makes an ass out of you and me. You have a wife?
No, we're not married.
Not married. Are you going to get married?
Well, yeah. This is when I said well like that. When I was in the jungle, I got sledged so hard because Sylvia and I have been together for 11 years and we're not married. And so people were like, pull your shit together. Pull your shit together, Ellie. And
What do you think of marriage?
I was never into it.
Yeah.
I never wanted to get married.
Well, it's such a patriarchal thing, isn't
that's
it?
Why. That's why
Ownership of women.
That's why I was never into being married. I thought, you know, living de facto.
Yeah.
And we have a child together now. I'm like, that's fine. You know, why do we need to get married? And I still feel that way, actually.
Yeah.
Which is why I'm not married.
Yeah. And she
But
feels the same?
she really wants to get married. And so now I'm like, well, how about I swallow my pride and do something to make her happy that doesn't really make a difference to me.
11 years she's been by your side as you make who you are, who you are. So, yeah, you can get married for her, mate. But 11 years, how'd you meet?
We met at the London Games. Actually, we met just prior to the London Games. She worked for Paralympics Australia. But my first memory of meeting her was in London.
Okay.
She worked for the events management team.
Okay. Is she still in events?
No. She moved on from that role a few years after we met.
And was it love at first sight?
No, it wasn't.
Was it hate at first sight?
No, it wasn't hate at first sight.
It was just whatever.
No, it wasn't even whatever. It was just I remember actually, now that, you know, she's reminded me of this, I do remember speaking to her on the phone. I had this Prime Minister's thing. I had to do something with Julia Gillard back when she was Prime Minister. And Sylvia rang me one morning after training to arrange it. And I remember that conversation, but I don't actually remember meeting her until a few months later, if that makes sense.
Yep.
But I met her at the London Games. I was at the after party after all the swimming had finished, and I was about 15 tequila shots deep by that stage.
Yeah, girl.
And so I was actually the annoying athlete that she was trying to make sure that I got home safely and was trying to get me into a
Were
taxi.
you legless?
I was absolutely legless. I was blind as well.
Did she carry you into the taxi?
Well, one of her friends, who is a mutual friend of ours, her and Sylvia were arguing over who was going to put me in the taxi effectively. So it was not a good impression, I will say that. But then I didn't speak to Sylvia really for a couple of months, and then I saw her again at the Paralympian of the Year Awards a few months after the games finished. And I took my boyfriend at the time because I was straighty 180 until I met Sylvia. And so I took my boyfriend at the time, and I remember introducing him to Sylvia. And I remember thinking that she just looked really beautiful. Like, she was obviously dressed up and looked really nice. And then, a couple more weeks passed, and then we just started talking on Facebook Messenger, and that's kind of went from there.
So it happened digitally, really?
Digitally, yes. Well, the
digitally
mutual,
later,
the
but
mutual,
digitally also.
The mutual friend that was, they were arguing over who was going to put me in the taxi, she had a birthday party in Sydney the following January and invited me to the birthday party, and I didn't have anywhere to stay in Sydney, so I stayed at Sylvia's.
So by that time, you'd been chatting?
We'd been chatting online.
And had it sparked then?
Yes.
Okay. Were you still with the bloke?
No, I wasn't at that stage, but I didn't really know what I was feeling because I grew up in a very conservative family.
Yep.
And I actually spoke about it with Lorena, my cousin, who was also an I'm a Celebrity, and was like, I'm speaking to this girl right now. I don't really know what it is. She's a perfect girl to talk about anything with because anything goes with Lorena.
Yes.
And she's like, I think you like her. And so I was like, okay, so I should go to Sydney then. And she's like, yeah. And
what's the age difference?
Between Sylvia and I?
Yeah.
4 years.
And has she always been gay?
No, she hasn't either.
Okay.
So, but she'd had a girlfriend previously.
So she was a little bit more experienced.
Oh, she was more experienced than I was.
She could help you kind of figure it out.
Yeah.
I'll tell you what you're feeling.
But it was really nice because I'd had a few boyfriends up until that point, and they never made me feel the same way that she did. So when I felt, the way that I did with Sylvia, I was like, this is the best. I should really explore what this is. But like I said, I grew up in a really conservative family, and so I didn't speak of it at all to anybody in my family except for my older sister.
For how long?
For years. I'm talking 6 years.
Really?
Yeah, a really long time.
And when you did, how did that go?
The only reason that I spoke to my parents about Sylvia and I is because we'd bought a house together, and it didn't go down well.
Wow.
So my mum rang me and I said, Sylvia and I bought a house together, and then she asked if we were a couple, and I said yes, and she got really upset initially.
So where's the conservatism come from?
So them? My dad isn't, but my mum is really religious.
Yep.
And
it's always religion, isn't it?
She assumed that if Sylvia and I were together that I would go to hell effectively. So that's where her concern was coming from. And it was a hard conversation obviously to have because I remember
you believe in that?
I'm not religious.
She didn't bring you up in that way?
My upbringing was to go to church on Sundays and I would go to youth group, but I never resonated with religion. I was more of a science. But she respected my views on religion. Growing up.
Yep.
And then I respected hers. And it's wonderful to see my parents together because my dad doesn't believe in religion at all. My mum does, and they still respect that within each other.
Okay, so go back to how your mum's reacted. So she was truly worried.
She was truly worried. I remember a phone conversation the next day. My mum rang me up again, and my oldest sister at the time was going through a really messy breakup, and they have a child together, and my mum was trying to keep that family unit together, even though it was so bad for my sister.
Religion.
And Mum said to me, you being with Sylvia, it's so bad for your soul. And I remember thinking my mum's trying to keep my sister and her partner together, even though it's
not supposed
so
to be.
Toxic.
Yeah.
And here's someone who makes me really happy and makes me feel amazing about myself. And she's saying that's bad for my soul. And so that comment in itself really hurt me. And I was thinking, what's this going to mean for my relationship with my mum? Because my mum and I are really close.
Yeah.
So it was a hard few weeks. But I'm really lucky that my mum has a stepmom who is really supportive of Sylvia and I, and my mum's best friend is really supportive of Sylvia and I. And she obviously had a lot of conversations with those two.
Yeah.
And it took her a while, but she's come around to, she like that Sylvia and I are together and that we will be.
But how about your soul?
Oh, well, she thinks my soul's going to be fine. I've never actually sat down with her and asked her how she feels about it now. Last year, I remember actually being in the car and I was driving. Mum was in the back and Sylvia was in the back with my mum. And Sylvia said to Mum, how do you feel about the relationship with Ellie and I now that a few years have passed? And Mum's voice went up an octave and I was like, I hate those conversations. I remember like just staring so hard out the windscreen, being like, why did you ask that, Syl? And Mum's like, well, she's like, I don't agree with it, but I've come to terms with it. Yeah.
How does that feel when your mum says she still doesn't agree with it? Do you just put that down to religion, not your mum?
I don't know what I put it down to. I don't really want to sit in it for long enough, to be honest. But she is accepting of Sylvia, and that's all that I could ask for at this point, you know.
Yeah.
And that obviously brought up a whole new concern when I had to tell my parents that Sylvia and I were expecting a baby and how that was going to work.
Yeah, how did that go?
So that was I'm smiling just thinking about it. So I remember I was in my apartment the night that I was like, we were about 3 months pregnant, and I was on the phone to my older sister. My older sister knew our whole IVF journey, all the ups and downs of what it is to go through IVF. And Sylvia and I were FaceTiming my sister, and I said to my sister Asha, I was like, I think that I need to tell Mum and Dad tonight that Sylvia and I are expecting a little baby in February.
Yeah, because you're past that first trimester.
We were past the first trimester by that stage. Now, my dad lives in Darwin. Well, my dad lived in Darwin during that time and my mum lived in Melbourne, and they're actually very rarely together.
Yeah.
And it was a point in time where my parents were together and they'd gone out to a restaurant that night. My mum had a few wines and she was like on cloud nine. So I was like, tonight is the night that we have to tell her.
Perfect.
And so the way that I told my parents was we FaceTimed them. I dialed my sister in as well, so my sister was on the call. And I said to Mum that Sylvia and I were expecting a third person to be living with us I'm like, but he's not coming for another 6 months. And Mum's like, what do you mean that you're getting a new roommate? And I was like, no, it's not a roommate. It's someone that's coming to live with us in 6 months. But they're not coming for 6 more months, Mum. And she's like, I don't understand.
She was 2 sheets to the wind.
I think she's like, are you in financial trouble? Do you need someone to help pay the rent? It was so funny. And then the penny dropped and her face just went, oh. She went, oh. And she's like, are you pregnant? And then she's like, I was pregnant. And I said, no, Sylvia's pregnant. And then we showed her the little scan and she was so excited. She was my mum loves babies. So
good.
She was on cloud nine. She was, very, very excited. And then she wanted like updates every single day after that.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
And I find like so many parents just change everything about them as parents when they become grandparents. Like my dad was an awful father, best grandfather.
Oh, really?
Like he got to redeem himself through the grandkids.
He probably learnt a lot by that stage.
Oh, yeah. And it was funny because I really resented it. Like I'd be like, can they yell at you? I could never yell at you, that kind of thing. But
he doesn't have the same responsibility as well.
Exactly. And his love was so abundant for them. And I also resented that because he clearly thought he had to be the authoritarian, like a lot of parents do. And then that's why grandparenting is just so much fun because they know that they can just dote and it's a really good thing. Whereas when you're a parent, you're really worried about, sparing the rod and spoiling the child. So, you've got that and grandparents it's just wonderful that is she still in Melbourne?
My mum, yeah.
Yeah, so you're in Sydney, so she wouldn't get to see him as often as she'd like to.
No, my whole family still live down here in Melbourne and Sylvia and I are up in Sydney and we'll stay up there. So we don't get to see her as often as my parents as often as we would like to.
Is Sylvia from Sydney?
Yeah, she's from Sydney as well. And I moved up there for swim training and I love it up there. So I've just stayed. I come down to Melbourne quite a bit though.
Oh, that's good.
End of last year, I was coming down 3 times a week.
Oh, frequent
So
flyer.
I'm trying to get
your points up.
I've got so many frequent flyer points.
I love it. I'll use some if you don't mind.
I'm trying to get Felix to become quite used to travel because as soon as he's on solids, I want him to come down on little day trips.
Yeah, great.
With me and to spend time with Mum because Mum is obsessed with him.
I'm obsessed with him.
He's gorgeous, isn't he?
He's divine.
He likes you.
He does, of course he does. He's a good little barber. I could talk to you forever, and I probably will now. We're friends.
Yeah, definitely.
And I'm so glad that you come to Melbourne all the time.
I thought you were up in Sydney, though.
I'm a Sydney gal.
Yeah.
But I live in Melbourne now.
Oh, okay.
So I the opposite. I love living in Melbourne. Like Melbourne is more me than Sydney ever was. So, and I grew up in a sporting family and I was the black sheep. I was the creative, dramatic, drama nerd. And so everyone was all about watching sport. I was never allowed to watch Young Talent Time. Thank you so much for coming on.
Oh, that's okay. I really enjoyed it.
Come back in a year. I've just started having guests coming back a year later. I've only done one so far because I only started my interviewing women a year ago. So it's a bit of a where are you now in a year's time?
Okay.
It might be around the same spot. You probably may not have gotten much further, but Felix will have. So let's talk about him in a year. See if he still loves me.
Maybe you can interview him as well.
I will.
What's she like as a mother?
Yes. And he'll just be at that age of going, no.
No, he won't. He's a perfect child.
Yeah, no, he is. Thank you.
Thank you. I had a good time.